Are my colleagues on yet?
Alejandra is not yet. Then I'm gonna go ahead and start the broadcast now.
Start in just a minute here.
Yeah. And then we have Matt before helping out today. He'll be kind of helping with city clerk stuff.
So Matt Ford will be doing the roll call. Good afternoon. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. It's 12:30. So Ms. Ford, if you could do the roll call, please. Certainly. Committee Member Alejandra Gutierrez. Committee Member Harmon.
Here.
And Chair Friedman. Here. Great. Thank you, Mr. Ford. So on to our agenda. This is the May 19th meeting of the City Finance Committee. And we are going to review the fiscal year 21 recommended budget and turn it over to Mr. Baudet for item A. Item 1, I should say.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the committee. So today we're going to continue with the review of the recommended budget. We have 3 items kind of before you today. First, we'll be hearing from the general fund departments. We have 5 departments giving their proposed fee changes. I then have a single staff adjustment for you to the recommended budget. And then we just need to get final recommendations from the committee that we will forward on to council. And that'll be the last item of the day. But before we begin, we can start with the general fund fee adjustments.
Actually, before we start, I just need to have neglected any public comments, Mr. Ford, for any items not on the agenda today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do see 2 callers. It might be for the items. So callers, if you are giving general public comment on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand in the app. And if you're here for a specific item, hold tight. Not seeing any general public comment, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you for that. Sorry about that. And Mr. Baudet, if you could continue on, please. Thank you.
Certainly. So today we'll begin, we will begin with the library department we'll hear from first.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Norma Cervantes, the Administrative Analyst at the library. Today, we will be presenting the library's proposed changes for the fee schedule for fiscal year 2021. As you all know, the library is a great community resource that can be utilized by all, from books to displaying art to holding community events. The library has a multitude of resources and materials that can be checked out by patrons, to the traditional book, DVD, CDs, to wireless hotspots and laptops. Next slide. For fiscal year 2021, we are proposing a couple of changes and additions to the unreturned and lost material section of the fee schedule. We're proposing to change the laptop replacement fee to $850, which is more in line with actual cost of replacement of the physical item, as well as software costs and labor for configuration of each of the laptops. We're also proposing an addition for the laptop accessories, which include the mouse and cord. This is a separate fee because if a patron returns a laptop without the accessories, this will enable us to be able to replace those items for the next user. Next slide. The library also offers exhibition spaces for local artists and meeting rooms for both library and public use. This year, we're proposing to add the tech lab to the schedule. This room is on our main level, which makes it highly visible and highly coveted by members of the public. Over the course of the last few years, the public has requested the use of the room as a space to hold their meetings or trainings and or other events. And we have not been able to rent it as it was not on the library's fee schedule. So we're proposing to add it for $150 for a 3-hour period and $50 for each additional hour after that. Next slide. We're proposing an addition of fees for use of the audiovisual equipment in the meeting rooms. The audiovisual equipment is always on high demand by members of the public that are renting the meeting rooms. The AV equipment for the Faulkner Gallery would be $200 for a 3-hour period and $50 for every additional hour. The tech lab would be $100 for a 3-hour period, as it is a smaller area and it's a less equipment to have set up. The deposit is only for the use of the tech lab. The equipment is only for use of the tech lab, as the tech lab equipment is highly visible and can easily walk off. And the refund would be refunded to the user after use. Next slide. This concludes the library's proposed fee schedule changes for fiscal year 2021. Thank you for your time and consideration.
I'll pause here for if my colleagues have any questions regarding the library. Hearing none, we'll continue on.
Next, we have Parks and Rec Department action.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman and committee members. Nicole Parmalee, Business Manager for the Parks and Recreation Department. And today I'm presenting the fee proposals for the Parks and Recreation General Fund budget for fiscal year 2021. And also joining me today as panelists are Jill Zachary, Parks and Recreation Director, and Rich Hanna, Recreation Programs Manager. Next slide, please. So every year our staff do a very thorough assessment of various factors when it comes to putting forward any proposed fee changes. We look at cost recovery, maximizing participation while also remaining competitive with other local service providers, providing quality programs and services at rates that are affordable to the community, and structuring our fees effectively to reach our target markets while also remaining flexible in our fee structure. And of course, this year, we have also factored in economic conditions and believe that the fee changes we're putting forward are modest enough that the market can still support them given the current climate. And as I said, we also do benchmark against other agencies and recreation service providers to make sure that we're in line with the market. And with the pie chart here on the right, you can see that the department needs to generate revenues in order to provide programs and services, since Parks and Recreation is not entirely subsidized by the general fund. In fact, departmental revenues make up 1/3 of the recommended budget, many of which are generated through these fees. Next slide, please. So across the department, we have about 190 recreation program and facility fee areas, largely in recreation. For the fiscal year 21 proposed budget, we have 11 new fees, and generally those are around new programs and activities that we're offering. And then additionally, we're proposing to discontinue 7 and make moderate changes to 42. Next slide, please. And here are some examples of our fee changes, and most of these are related to our cost of doing business and areas in which we are continuing to see costs rise, including in minimum wage and water costs. And these cost of doing business increases are reflected in several categories of fee increases that you can see here on the slide, including photo and film shoots, sporting event rentals, sport field rentals, and swim lessons and lap swim rates. And then additionally, tennis group lessons are proposed to increase by about $11 to ensure we can recruit quality instructors to teach. And this pricing level is also in line with other recreation agencies and well below private tennis clubs. And then looking at our annual pickleball permits, this increase might look high at 25%, but this is actually only a $2 increase, which will support court resurfacing and maintenance for increased use, as the number of pickleball courts has quadrupled in recent years due to increased demand. And then for the street tree removal application fee in the Parks Division, we are proposing to increase that from $50 to $75, which is the first increase since the fee was established 10 years ago. And this new amount is more reflective of the associated staff time spent in processing these applications. So while it is a 50% increase, we feel it is still affordable and won't discourage residents from applying for the permit. And the proposed new fee would provide a 20% cost recovery on the administrative time spent for each permit. And then finally, our nonprofit lease rates reflect the standard annual increase of 3% to offset utility and allocated cost increases associated with these lease spaces. And that concludes my presentation, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from my colleagues? I do have one, but I'll see if there's some questions from my colleagues. Well, I'll start off. For the tree removal, it says the $25 increase. What is the actual cost now?
Chair Friedman and committee members, it's about $368 in staff time.
That's the cost of the permit. It's going to be $368, and so it hasn't been raised in 10 years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no other further questions from my colleagues on this section, we will go on. Mr. Baudet, I believe fire is next.
That's correct. Fire department will be up next.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman and members of the Finance Committee. Eric Nickel, Fire Chief. I'll be joined in this presentation by Ron Lechty, our Business Manager, as well as Eric Johnson, who assisted the fire department as well as other city departments on a fee study. Before I kick this off and send it over to Ron, I just want to share some perspective as a new fire chief coming in from the outside from an organization that had very aggressive cost recovery, particularly within its fire prevention activities. When I first got here, the fire department had not done a fee study in over 15 years. So with the support of the city administrator's office, we were able to undertake a fee study, and we got the results early this year, of course, just before everything started to close down from COVID-19. So with that perspective in mind, and coming from an agency that where the Fire Prevention Bureau was very close to 100% cost recovery, you know, it was really important to look at these different revenue sources and cost recovery for the work that the fire department was doing and not even coming close to recovering its full cost. So with that, I will kick it over to our business manager and our consultant.
Good afternoon, Chair and Finance Committee members. I'm Ron Lechty, Fire Department's Business Manager. I'm here to present the Fire Department's proposed fee changes in the recommended fiscal year 2021 budget. As you just heard, the Fire Department is making this recommendation based upon a fee study performed by revenue and cost specialists. The Fire Department charges certain fees for certain services provided to the community. State legislation requires that fees for services not exceed the reasonably borne costs in providing those services. This is also known as cost recovery. Fire management recognizes the need to re-examine these services and rates periodically to determine the appropriate cost recovery. Fees that are lower than the full cost are being subsidized by the city's general fund. Legally, fees must not exceed the cost of providing services, but if they are lower than the full cost, this will require a diversion of funds to cover the subsidized costs of these services. As you heard, it's been about 15 years since a fee study has been performed for the fire department. Fire contracted with the California firm Revenue and Cost Specialist to prepare this fee study report. As you heard, community development has also used them, as well as over 250 other government jurisdictions and agencies throughout California. Studies recommendations increase rates on many of our fees. I will be going over most of these slides continuing on, but first I'd like to introduce Eric Johnson of Revenue Cost Specialist to just give you an overview of the methodology in his fee study that we're basing these recommendations on. And then I'll take over and we'll talk about the rest of the fees and slides in detail. So now we can hear from Eric Johnson.
Great, thank you, Ron. This is Eric Johnson from Revenue Cost Specialist. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Just want to do a quick overview on the methodology. It's really the same concept that we used when we did the community development study last year. And just from a business perspective, you need to know what your costs are to provide services to your customers to be able to make some decisions on what kind of cost recovery you need. So just quickly, let me walk you through the process that we use with the fire department. We met with the department staff. We wanted to establish what are the services and the time spent on those services. And so as you will see through as Ron goes through the results, that there was some changes made to the categories. And that really came out of talking to staff about what really makes sense for different categories going forward. And sometimes we collapse categories, sometimes we change categories. And it was really because that's where staff was spending their time and it made more sense from that perspective. To come up with the cost, we looked at the actual salaries for every position and along with the benefits. We used the fire department 1920 budget. We used for overhead costs, for city overhead costs, we used the city's cost allocation plan. And for department, we calculated a department overhead cost number also. And so then once we determined what the cost of the services were, we compared that to the current fee and then recommended 100% cost recovery to cover those costs for the proposed fee that you'll see in front of you today. And there of course will be other things that the department does. Most of what the department does, of course, is not fee supported with the operations response, but also there's public outreach, there's general fire prevention services that are not fee supported. So what you see in front of you today are those things that the parts of the community are receiving extra amounts of service than the general fire service. And so that's why we typically call them personal choice services. And so with that, unless there's any questions on that methodology or how we came up with the cost, I will turn it back over to Ron.
Okay, welcome back. Chair and committee members, next slide, please. I thought look at the fire's fiscal year 21 recommended revenues is a good place to start to put the fee discussion in context of overall revenues. Fire is mostly supported by the general fund. Fire's budget is just under $31 million this year. And you can see here from this schedule that $5 million is per revenues. That means about $29 million is subsidized by the general fund. Of these revenues we're seeing on this chart, we're going to be focusing on the fees and service charges, the first line. Click, please. There you go. And you can see we're recommending an increase in revenues of $129,775,000 for a total fees of $314,863. Next slide, please. This is a detailed look at our fees by category. The fire department has 30 different fees organized into 4 categories. Categories are building plan check reviews, life safety fire inspections, Title 19 inspections, and California Fire Code permits. Next slide, please. Building plan check reviews is our largest category, both in terms of overall cost and time spent and the number of fees. This category contains 14 separate fees for plan reviews. Our Prevention Bureau of Fire Inspectors conduct these reviews. The majority of these fees involve activities involving the residential and commercial construction reviews. About 63% of our fees are these. Other types of reviews, though, involve sprinkler systems, new fire alarm systems, underground piping, and spray booths. Our Prevention Bureau inspectors are trained in the California Fire Code, the California Building Code, and the California Residential Code. And they conduct on an average, about 1,700 plan reviews annually. These fees are currently highly subsidized by the general fund, where it's calculated that we recover only about 68% of the cost. Fire expects to recover almost $100,000 in this category in revenues for these changes. Next slide, please. These are our two largest categories of fees that I had mentioned for residential construction review and commercial construction review. You can see the current fee and the recommended fee. And this again is per the study and per interviewing, how we spend our time doing these activities. Next slide. We do have a new fee per the study, and that is this high fire landscape review. When inspectors review construction plans in the high fire hazard area, if the project contains any ground disturbance, a landscape plan review is required. Oops, what happened? Sorry, guys. Lost my screen. The fee study determined that fire has not been recovering the cost of the landscape review, and therefore, under the cost recovery model, this new fee is warranted for the service that's provided. Next slide. Our second category of fees, and it's our second largest category of fee revenue, is our life safety fire inspections. And we have 4 fees in this category. We conduct about 2,000 of these inspections annually. These inspections are conducted by firefighters on our fire engine companies and within their districts, their fire station's district. This helps the firefighters to familiarize themselves with the risks and hazards within their district. Currently, our fees provide 88% of recovery, so very little increase is recommended for these fees. Though fire does expect to recover almost $18,000 in new revenues per these changes. Next slide. Like I said, these are 2 major categories of fees in this category, representing 98% of fire inspections. In fact, the first category, their hotel and apartment inspections, that represents 70% of all inspections. And we see very little change in rates here because, as I said, most of these costs are already recovered in our current fees. The study recommends an increase to the building shell inspection. About 25% of our inspections are these types. Next slide. Third category of our fees are Title 19 inspections. Title 19 refers to Section 19 of the California Fire Code. These are inspections on state licensed facilities such as schools and daycare, nursing homes, assisted living, and hospitals. And our fire prevention inspectors conduct about 80 of these inspections annually. These are mostly recovered in the cost of our current fee structure, and we expect only $400 in new revenue to be generated by the changes to our recommendations. The next slide shows examples of these costs and these fees and the changes to them. Rather large, the final fee there for the hospital fire clearance, we do see a significant increase from $1,000 to almost $1,600 there. Next slide. Our final category of fees are our California Fire Code permits that we issue. The Fire Prevention Bureau issues permits according to the California Fire Code, and we have 8 fees in this category. Therefore, such things as extended occupancies for special events, temporary tent setups, motion picture and film production, and firework displays. These fees represent a very small component of our overall fee revenue at just 6%. And currently these fees, the current fee structure provides just 47% cost recovery. So a larger fee increase is recommended in this category to recover the costs. And fire expects to recover almost $11,000 in new revenues per these changes. Next slide. And here we can see the increase of our specialty permits and our fireworks display. 90% of our activity, or 80 to 90% of our activity is in the fire specialty permit category. And we have 2 final slides where I'm going to hand the discussion back over to Chief Nickel to discuss our Defensible Space program and a technology surcharge.
Thank you, Ron. So on the last 2 slides, we want to share with you what we're proposing to do with some of the additional cost recovery that we were bringing in, that we would be bringing in under these proposed fees. The first is a Defensible Space program. And when we talk about Defensible Space, this is wildland-urban interface. Our current program is driven purely by complaints. It doesn't achieve consistent results. We don't have the staff to get out and do a comprehensive inspection on every parcel of property. As we're going through the CWPP program right now, project right now, some of you have received comments from some of the community members about, that they have to complain in order to get a property inspected. This part-time inspector would be able to go out and do comprehensive inspections in the field, notice the property owners, and then pass on these complaints to the fire mitigation specialist. Next slide, please. The last is a technology surcharge that we're proposing under this fee increase. As you may be aware, the city undertook a very large capital investment into some efficiency software called Acela. And Acela is a really enterprise-wide software system that links plan submission, project development, project review, and all the different city departments that would do it. It's moving from turning in, big giant reams of paper to an all electronic submission review process. The Acela program also allows for a field module for engine company inspections. So as Ron had mentioned earlier, it would allow our engine companies that already are doing these inspections to tie into the existing Acela platform with this new software module that would make that much more efficient, much more accountable, and achieve a greater level of risk reduction in the community that we're unable to do at this time. The last piece is it automates the data collection and billing process. Right now, we have to dedicate a staff member, an administrative support member, to hand prepare paper bills and check different databases within city departments. It's very inefficient, and we would be able to save a great deal of staff time and obviously some personnel costs if we had this. So those are the 2 programs that we would be using the additional resources for. That concludes our presentation. Do you have any questions?
Any questions from my colleagues on the council regarding fire fees? Well, I do have a question. It's more a general big picture question. In light of the economics of in particular to businesses, but even in some cases to homeowners, but in particular businesses, and some of these fees are increasing. Is there, and some of these fees are minimal, some of them are larger. Is there any discussion or thought on maybe phasing them in over a 2-year approach rather than all in 1 year, just to lessen the impact to our businesses as they're trying to recover?
Chair Friedman and members of the committee, excellent question. We have had internal dialogue around that at this point. As I alluded to in the beginning of our presentation, we had the fee study completed before COVID-19 shut down and social distancing closed down most of the community. We understand the challenges that the community has with any fee increase from any city department. And we're certainly aware of that and sensitive to that. Ultimately, it's a policy decision. If it is the committee's desire to phase these in over a period of time, we certainly could put together a plan for that phased approach.
Okay, thank you. We'll have we can have discussion and comments after all the presentations and public comment, but I'll be interested to hear from my colleagues on this particular point of whether we want to do it all this year or if there is maybe a phased-in approach that we could recommend to council or maybe forward to council. So anything else, Chief Nickel, on this?
Nothing
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Mr. Bozette, I believe Public Works is up next.
That's correct. Public Works Department will be up next.
Thank you. Mr. Hendel.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman and members of the Finance Committee. Adam Hendel, Principal Engineer in the Public Works Department. I'm here today to talk to you about fees within my land development engineering program as well as transportation planning. Next slide, please. So as Fire discussed with fee studies, Public Works and Community Development undertook a large fee study last year. So I'll be rather brief with this presentation and just cover a couple of minor changes. The first thing is adjusting all fees across the board, 3% increase across the board to cover increase in expenses. I also wanted to highlight that my land development engineering program is currently at 88.5% cost recovery. The target is 100, but we're pretty close on year to date. And our focus moving forward is going to be on keeping the activity up and keep processing all the cases. There was a minor change in our building permit reviews. When we did the fee study last year, building permit reviews, I recommended a minor subsidy on those to keep the costs down. And with the current climate, I felt that it was appropriate to charge full cost on these items shown at the bottom of the screen. Next slide. A couple other items I just wanted to highlight for the committee. The first item is small cell facilities. As I think you're aware, the Federal Communication Commission has established some requirements on fees. So I've codified or I've listed those in this year's fee resolution. And I just wanted to note, we still can charge for certain additional items beyond review, like inspection and those types of things to recover costs. Outdoor dining license annual renewal fee. Last year, you may recall, we changed the program from rent-based to purely cost recovery. We still do have plans to charge the $250 per year, just the renewal. So that'll be collected later this summer. And then lastly, I did add a new fee item this year. The vendor-owned news racks, if they're abandoned or damaged in the street and the city needs to step in and take care of them, we have a fee to recover those or remove those impounded racks, $200 a site or $80 an hour. Next slide. So the other section within Public Works is the general fund fee is transportation planning. And again, the 3% across the board increase to cover expenses. And one minor change related to timing for how fees are recovered. Transportation planning spends a lot of their time, like it sounds like, in the planning phase, and they review design review applications, and they also review building permit applications. And what staff discovered is that those fees should be the same both for design review and for building permit review, and the timing of how those fees are collected is really important. That's a minor change that we made at the last minute, and we're recommending that be included at adoption. And with that, I believe that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hendel from my colleagues? I do have one, and in particular, it relates kind of the same questions I had regarding Chief Nickel and fire presentation is, being cognizant of the economics coming out of this, especially from our businesses, in particular the restaurants with the outdoor dining fee. I saw that last year we removed a lot of that, but we just had the cost recovery. But in this case, it's $250 is the cost recovery for it. However, we may be expanding that type of permit that they have with outdoor dining to go out on the sidewalks. And the restaurants in particular have been, not in particular, but have been impacted severely by this. And what is the total amount that this fee, the $250 raises? And then when would, you mentioned in summer we'd be collecting it. What if we decided to go forward with it? What's the farthest we could delay it out? Is it possible to look at the type of revenue and maybe it's something that we might want to defer for a year and just not have a fee this year or a minimal fee this year? But I just want to be very cognizant because $250 right now for a restaurant is very significant.
Chair Friedman, excellent points and questions. Let me first clarify, this is for the outdoor dining program as it exists with permanent barriers, the actual sidewalk vendors. We have approximately 40 licenses right now. So 40 times 250 is about $8,000 or so. This doesn't necessarily apply to what the council is discussing related to opening up State Street and having vending on the street via a special event permit. I think that's going to be handled separately. So new folks that want to participate in that program, they're not necessarily going to be paying this $250 fee. This is for people that have the barriers already on the sidewalk and to keep their license active. I think probably the best way to handle this would be, because we have already reduced the fee from previous years, would be that if a vendor had an issue making this payment, that we would discuss with them some kind of payment plan to get it collected by the end of the year. It's our goal to use this fee to keep the account holders current with their lease. Did I answer all your questions there?
That sounds reasonable, but if there's a way to spread it out over time or defer it within the year, but not just, this summer, everyone gets a $250 fee right when they're trying to reopen and get their business. So that answers my question. I see Council Member Harmon has some questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Friedman. No, I just wanted to say thank you first for that clarification with regard to whatever the City Council may decide on allowing restaurants to utilize sidewalk or street space. That's a really important concept to keep separate. That was kind of my main question. So I appreciate that. And I just wanted to also ask that when this comes to full council, if we can have a little bit more detail about what the options might be for deferral of this $250 fee. I agree with you, Councilmember Friedman, that if restaurants open up and get the bill in the same week, that might be a little bit tough. So to the extent that we can work on some kind of deferral or delay, or even share with folks that we might really be able to work with them, that's something I would very much be in favor of on that point in particular. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Hendel. And we'll move on to community development. Is that correct, Mr. Baudet? Mr. Hamilton, you're up.
I'm sorry. I'll hand it over to community development.
Chair Friedman, committee members, my name is James Hamilton, Community Development Business Manager. I have with me today Community Development Director George Buell, City Planner Renee Brook, Chief Building Official Andrew Stuffler, and President of Revenue Cost Specialist Eric Johnson. And we're here today to present Community Development's recommended fee resolution for fiscal year 2021. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So to give you a broad overview of the presentation, the topics we're going to touch on, and the order that we're going to address them, we're going to open with a review of the 2019 fee study that Eric Johnson is going to give a quick 3-slide summary to just bring everyone up to speed with last year's fee study. I felt that there's value in retracing this study for a couple of reasons. One, there are some phased increases in the planning division that relate to last year's study. Additionally, there's some recommendations for positions that are funded by fees in building and safety, and the costing for those comes from the model that was developed during last year's study. And lastly, for those of us who weren't present for the presentation last year, it will just kind of help bring everybody up to speed. After we hear from Eric Johnson, we'll move on to the planning division and hear about a reformatting of fees that's being proposed there, as well as various increases and adjustments to fees. And then finally, we'll end out with building and safety and hear about the various fee increase proposed there. And one point that I want to stress is the staffing recommendations that you're going to hear in this presentation are consistent with the feedback that community development has received from the Novak Group, the consultant conducting the workflow study. That report will come to council in full on June 2nd when we bring our budget presentation. And I just want to stress that the recommendations that we've received are consistent with the staffing recommendations. Next slide, please.
Hi, I'm sorry. May I ask a question, Mr. Hamilton?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Friedman. I just wanted some clarification on that last point. I was under the impression that we hadn't received any recommendations from Novak yet. Can you just clarify that?
I'm going to let Director Buell.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, Chair Friedman, Councilmember Hardman, we have not received a formal report from the Novak Group. Last week, or I believe it was last week, we had a conversation with them, understanding or in anticipation of questions coming from the Finance Committee today, and ultimately from the City Council when we give our budget presentation on June 2nd. We recognize the need to have additional information as soon as possible, and so we really kind of lit a fire and said we need this information so that we can make informed recommendations going forward. And while we don't have anything formal at this point, we will by the time we go into our budget hearing on June 2nd.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So at this point, I'd like to invite Eric Johnson to just present these next 3 slides to do a quick review of the fee study from last year.
Great, thank you, James. Again, this is Eric Johnson from Revenue Cost Specialist. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Similar to what I talked about earlier with the fire department, it's the same process that we went through with community development last year, where we really spent the time with staff, broke down their services, identified the time being spent, and if you'll remember, that was a 6-month process that we went through as staff. So it was a very intensive process to identify all of the time that staff is spending, and then we develop fully allocated hourly rates, again with the actual salaries and the benefits, the city overhead from the city cost allocation plan, and various departmental and divisional overheads to capture the full kind of business billing cost of the employees to be able to do their jobs. Then of course we made recommendations to recover those costs, and which the council then acted on last year. Next slide, please. And of course, as part of that, there was part of the department was providing services that are tax supported, especially in the planning area, with especially with design services. But all the fee services that were identified and the council acted upon were personal choice services, those services where the customer is identifiable, the service is measurable, and most importantly, benefits an individual or a group. Next slide, please. But at the end of the day, it's the city council that makes that final call on what should be paid for with taxes and what should be paid for by the person or group receiving the service. As the committee is well aware of the times that we're in right now, and being cognizant of the financial state of the businesses and the potential fee payers, while also being cognizant of the city's financial state and trying to recover costs in a way that benefits everybody. And with that, I will turn it back to James to talk about proposed changes, unless there's any questions at this point.
Thank you, Eric. I would just ask you if you could remain available till the end of the presentation in case there's any questions regarding.
Mr. Hamilton, I do see Councilmember Gutierrez has some her questions.
Can you guys go back to slide 33? 33. On these points, do you guys have like an outline of, let me see how I word it. I want to see how you guys were able to identify, you know, the costs and services provided by customers. Like, is there any data that reflects this information on this slide? Like numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. When we went through this process last year, that we developed a report that I think was 300 and some odd pages that breaks out detail, who's involved, how much time they're involved, how many of these the city does, and the costs to go along with that. So that information did exist for the information we generated last year. And then of course we're made some changes and updates to those costs this year.
Is there a way that I can obtain that information?
Yes, Chair Freeman, Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez, we have the detailed information available on our website, and we'll be happy to send you a link so that you can see all of the information that was gathered and computed as part of the fee study.
Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Buell, if you could send that actually to the entire council out of this discussion, because there might be questions on that, or we might need to re-look at it ourselves. Like, excellent question, council member. So if you could send it to all of us, that would be very helpful.
Yes, will do.
Thank you. And just as a point of clarity on the fee study, so that is also a public-facing document and has been made available in the clerk's office during the noticing period for the fee increases. And I believe there's, I want to go back to, I think, slide 36. There we go. Okay, thank you, Eric. So we're going to move into the planning division fees at this point, and I want to provide a broad overview of what planning is proposing in fiscal year 2021. The planning division is proposing a reformatting of their fee structure, whereas in prior years it was designed both by application type and approving body, and that sometimes would be difficult for both applicants and staff to find and identify the appropriate fee. This year they're being redesigned in kind of broad category headers: appeals, design review, development review, land use, and then below those headers you'll see the specific application type. With regard to fee increases, there's a broad across the board 3% increase being proposed to cover the cost of increases in operational costs. And then apart from that 3% increase, there are a couple different groups of fees that rise above the 3% increase. One group is fees that were approved last year as part of the land development fee study, and they were planned to be increased or implemented over 3 years to reduce the impact. Another group are adjustments and classifications for reclassifications of positions, and also some analysis that was done by staff regarding staff time required for the fees. And we'll get into more detail in the coming slides on those. And then also there are several new fees that are being introduced, and there will also be a little bit more detail on those. Next slide, please. So with regard to the land development fee study increases, when the analysis was done last year, those fees were so far below cost recovery that in order to bring them up to cost recovery, it required an over $2,500 increase and an over 50% increase to reach full cost recovery. There was a plan to implement that increase over 3 years, and the motivation behind that was just to reduce the impact to the applicant. Fiscal year 2021 is year 2 of that phased increase, and broadly the fees related to that were found to be that far below cost recovery were pre-application review services, subdivisions, conditional use permits, and coastal development permits. Next slide, please. The other 2 groups of fees that are outside of that 3% increase are fees associated with the Historic Landmark Commission and Architectural Board of Review, where 2 planning technicians are being reclassified to assistant planners, and the increases in salary and benefits associated with that reclassification are being recovered through a slightly larger increase. That reclassification was warranted because over time, the skills and kind of knowledge required to appropriately staff those commissions and boards has grown through complexity and changes in state regulation. And the other group of fees that are being adjusted above the 3% are staff did an analysis of the fee resolution and took a look to make sure that things were relatively in line with last year's study. And it was found that there were a number of fees where when the fee study concluded in April 2019, there have been changes in procedural and regulatory requirements that just require additional staff time. So in order to recuperate that additional staff time, adjustments were made above the 3%. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we just list the services that have been subsidized historically in the planning division. These are items where the council has found that there's community benefit or maybe operational benefit to offering them at a below cost recovery level. And I've listed them on the screen here. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll keep the presentation moving. Next slide, please. With regard to the new fees being introduced in the planning division, there's, I believe, 6, but I'm just going to step through them really quick. I have the city planner available if you'd like to get into details on any of them. So processing streamlined housing development applications. This is in response to amended state law, historic resource evaluations completed by urban historian, and fees for projects requiring more than 1 staff hearing officer. Next slide, please. So these are also the new fees that are being introduced: requests for sign ordinance exceptions, deposit-based fee for requests to change the city's sphere of influence, and fees to recover costs to release prior recorded agreements. And that brings us to the end of the planning division. We're now going to move into building and safety. So with regard to building and safety, we're proposing an 8% increase in building and safety fees. There are 3 components to that increase. The first component is, like planning and like some of the other departments that you've heard from today, is a 3% across the board increase to cover increases in operational cost. The second component is a 3.5% increase to fund a new building inspector. And the third component is a 1.5% increase to fund half of an Acela administrator position. We'll get into a little bit more detail on those in the coming slides. Next slide, please. So with regard to the building inspector, I worked with Eric. Oh, go ahead, Alejandro. Council Committee Member.
Go ahead, Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you. I'm sorry, on the past slides, before going into building and safety, you said you had somebody on the line that we can go more in depth in those bullet points.
Your mic is a little low right now.
Sorry.
There we go.
So on the last 2 slides before going into building and safety, you said you had somebody on the line that can give us a little bit more detail on those bullet points.
Yeah, if you'd like to discuss the new fees in a little bit more detail, the city planner is available.
I do. Do you mind, Councilmember Friedman?
Yes, and I do see Ms. Brooke ready to go.
Sure, thank you, Chair Friedman and Committee Member Alejandro Gutierrez. So these 2 slides here, it was the new fees I think you had questions about. I think there is 1 slide before this. Yeah, thank you. So some of these new fees are coming out because of amended state law and different processes that we've had to accommodate into our review, particularly of housing projects mostly. So we've added some fees to account for that additional process that we are doing for certain housing projects. Density bonus projects is one example. There's another streamline, SB 330 calls for a preliminary application review. So we've had to recognize those different processes and charge a fee for them. Historic resource evaluations. So there's a high level of evaluation done by the HLC if a project is proposing significant enough changes that we need, or the applicant hires a private consultant to prepare a report, and that goes to the HLC. But our urban historian prepares upwards of sometimes 200 of these in-house administrative level reviews of less significant changes to potential historic resources, and we've not been charging for those. She goes through research, she comes to her own conclusion about whether or not it's a significant change, and so we're just adding a fee for that. Fees for projects requiring more than one staff hearing officer, that's just to reflect a fee we have for planning commission hearings. We never did have one for the staff hearing officer. It's pretty rare, but in case there's a project, for whatever reason, the applicant wanted to make changes to satisfy concerns and it was being continued, a small fee to recuperate the costs associated with that second hearing. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, on that last bullet point, just for my clarification on the other slide, there we go. So if somebody goes in front of the committee and they request the changes, so when the owner of the project comes back with the changes, that means they're going to be charged a fee to go back and review those changes?
Right, so it's pretty rare for staff hearing officer, even for planning commission, but we had this fee in the resolution for planning commission. It might be just that the applicant decides to want to make changes to the project in order to gain approval. And so it, the items continued, and then they might submit revised plans to staff. We prepare a revised staff report. There's a second hearing held on it. So it's just trying to recover some of those costs. It's not that common, but we didn't have a fee in there for staff hearing officer like we did for planning commission. So we've added one in case that occurs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide. I think it was exceptions to the sign ordinance fee. Right, so we had a fee like this in the resolution for many years. This is when an applicant wants to ask for relief from the sign ordinance requirements. It's usually because they want more signage than the code allows, or they want a higher letter height than the code allows. When Eric Johnson interviewed staff about the time, if it took any extra time to process these, our staff indicated it doesn't. But we've since then, and since removing the fee from this resolution, we've received a lot of these exception requests, and we actually are learning that it does take us extra time. It takes the committee extra time more than anything to sort of weigh the benefits and the exception requests. So we've added in a fee for that. The deposit-based fee, anytime we have a very unique application type, like an annexation or general plan amendment, we found that it's best to just have a starting deposit amount and then we draw from that. We didn't have that type of fee established for when there are requests to modify the city's sphere of influence. In my experience, in 19 years, we hadn't received a request like that until last year. So we didn't have a fee to charge. So we wanted to add that in case we happen to get that request again. And then recovering costs to release prior recorded agreements. So we have a fee in the resolution to cover our time preparing these recorded agreements. And we pass along the fee that the county charges us to actually record them. We did not have a fee in our resolution to release people from prior agreements. And it might be just because conditions don't exist anymore, something is superseding that prior agreement, and so the staff time to release them from that agreement. Now we have a fee for that. I think that was it.
Thank you.
Questions answered? Okay, thank you. Continue on, Mr. Hamilton. Your mic is off.
Sorry about that. Next slide. So as I had stated, Building and Safety Division is proposing an 8% overall fee increase, 3% to cover the cost of increase in just operational expenses. And then this is one of the other components of that 8% increase. It's a 3.5% proposed increase to fund a new building inspector. I worked with Eric Johnson to determine the actual cost of bringing that staff member on with the city. Took that, fed it into the fee model that was developed during last year's fee study, and came out that a 3.5% increase was what would be required. Building and Safety Division believes that with this new staff member, the service enhancement that you can expect are 2,000 additional on field inspections, improved timeliness of inspections from the current level of 75% to the target rate of 100%, and also improve specialty plan check from 80% on time to the P3 target of 95% on time. And this would be accomplished by allowing the specialty inspectors to spend more time in the office, and the new inspector would be doing more of the field work. Next slide, please.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
This 3.5 increase is based on the recommendation of this current report that's being worked on? Or just like an overall evaluation of the department?
The 3.5% increase was last year. Eric Johnson from Revenue Cost Specialist is here, and in developing the fee study and coming up with what full cost recovery is for the various services, they took a look at the budget and actual expenses for the department, and he built a model to come up with how much each fee should cost. Using that model, I gave him the information on the actual cost of bringing this new position on. He put that into the model and said, based on that information, a 3.5% increase in fees would be required to offset that additional cost to the city, because we would be aiming for 100% cost recovery on this building inspector.
Thank you.
Thank you. Continue on, Mr. Hamilton.
Okay, last slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's all of that 8%. There's an additional 1.5% increase that, also using the fee model from last year and working with Eric, we found that that would be the appropriate percentage to offset the cost of this, of funding half this Acela administrator position. And just as a point of clarity, this position would actually be a staff person in the Information Technology Fund, and they would be tasked with maintaining and improving the city's permitting system.
Mr. Buell, did you have anything to add? I see you turned your camera on.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I also watched the council deliberation on the city administrator's budget, and questions came up with regards to the Acela administrator. Our intent at this point is to do the best job that we can in recruiting a top-tier administrator that can handle this work, so as to reduce the need to seek additional funds to work on the Acela software for various departments, including community development. As Mr. Hamilton pointed out, this position would reside in IT. They'd be an IT employee with funding coming through the various through permits, and in the future probably interfund charges for departments that also would enjoy the services of that position. I also want to clarify was made during the IT budget presentation. Questions were raised as to the need for, at this point, having spoken with IT staff, our hope would be that with funds that would be remaining unspent in this year's budget could be carried over for the next fiscal year to cover work that we anticipate coming up that we don't think the administrator would be able to do in a timely fashion. As you see here, we're looking at funding for half of the position. We know that the position will be vacant for a period of time, and so this will allow for continuity over the course of the coming fiscal year.
Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I'm sorry, Mr. Buell, you may have answered this, but I couldn't hear for a minute, so I apologize. Is this, well, first, did we anticipate the need for this type of extra help and assistance when I wasn't on council when we signed on or sort of instituted this program? Was that something that we thought about in the first instance? And my second question is, do we anticipate that this position, this ASELA administrator position, will be necessary forever, like through the life of this program? Or is it something that you think in 2 years or 3 years, a specific administrator won't be necessary? Or is this a sort of forever position? I guess is just my question about this.
Yes, Chair Friedman, Committee Member Harmon, in answering your question, was it anticipated at the very outset? And that goes back years and years. And no, I don't believe it was anticipated to the extent that it is. As you might recall, Mr. Four, when he was answering questions of the council a few days ago, or last week rather, it requires a very heavy technological or IT lift. And we have become acutely aware of that. And in answer to your second question, as to the need for this position over the long term, the answer would be yes, we anticipate that will be the case.
Okay, and have we done any sort of cost benefit analysis about whether this is still the best program for us to use, given the increase in costs that are, you know, now sort of baked into its use in the long term?
To my knowledge, that analysis has not been completed. I can talk with our colleagues in the IT division and find out if that type of analysis has been done.
Yeah, my only concern, and I'd be interested in getting some feedback on this, is I want us to be wary of the sunk cost fallacy, where we say we've already put in so much money that we can't change course or course correct here. I certainly support, you know, those of you who are experts, if you're telling me this is absolutely the right way to go and we've devoted so much time and money and energy, you know, okay, but, you know, I don't want us to feel that we cannot say, look, we didn't anticipate the challenges of this, and it no longer makes prudent financial sense given that we have to bring on a whole other administrator. So I want us to be aware of that fallacy, and I will say to you all that I don't think there's any shame in us saying we now understand a new reality of this program, and I just would be interested, and this will likely come up at council, if you guys could be prepared to speak to just why this still remains the right choice for our city, or why it doesn't, if you think about it and go in a different direction.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. Appreciate that constructive feedback. Mr. Four, I see your camera is on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Freeman. Just representing information technology, I just wanted to jump in real quickly on Committee Member Harmon's question. So ASELA is no doubt powerful. It's incredibly powerful. It gives us a lot of latitude, and it's complicated, but complicated doesn't mean that we chose the wrong application. I think that the process of looking at what was out there and what would accommodate us, not only with Tidemark, but also for the next 20 years, this was the application that the city, you know, staff citywide decided was that product that would meet their needs. It's complicated, it's hard. We've gotten it off the ground. And what we anticipate this application specialist doing is keeping it off the ground. And one thing that I guess we've learned, but is abundantly clear, just like with Munis, just like with our utility billing system, just like with Cartograph, our asset management system, these big enterprise applications are not such anymore where we can turn the power switch on and walk away. There's a lot of sustainment that needs to happen to keep it up and running. We are on our final punch list of the launch phase of getting it up and running. In some aspects of Acela are well beyond the utility of Tidemark, what we used to have. We're enjoying big advantages. There are others where we're still, over time, with this administrator position, we're going to close that gap. And so I think for as long as we have Acela, which we were hoping was a 20-year solution, for as long as we have that, we'll have this administrator position. And we have looked at other cities that have brought on Acela. I think it was the city of Thousand Oaks or Ventura has 7 Acela administrators. We're not looking for that. We're looking for 1. So we're not looking to match another city, but we have found that other cities did need to bring on, just like their other big enterprise applications, a person to sustain it and refine it for the life of the product. So I hope that gives some context.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. I think that does provide some context, and I'm sure that will come up again at council during our budget discussions. So anything further, Mr. Buell, on this? And then Mr. Hamilton, I think you have a couple more slides. Is that right?
That's really it. So questions?
Okay. Sure. I'm going to open it up, Mr. Ford, to any members of the public right now who have questions on the items. Are there any public comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have one speaker, Daryl Scheck. Daryl, if you are looking to speak on this item, could you please hit the raise your hand function in the app? Mr. Chair, let me double check on that, and I'll come back with public comment. Oh, we do. Okay, we do have a speaker. Yes, sir.
It's Mr. Scheck. Go ahead and unmute his mic, Mr. Ford.
Mr. Scheck, I'm gonna unmute your microphone. Please turn down your television. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. And go ahead, sir.
I apologize, Matt. I was actually just trying to say that I had no questions for the group, and thank you very much.
Okay, then. Thank you, Mr. Scheck, for those. So with that, I'll close public comment and now open it up to my colleagues for any comments or further questions. Do I hear any from council members Harmon or Gutierrez? Now would be the time. Councilmember Gutierrez, you are up.
So it's not a question, it's more of a comment. When going up to council and presenting this at the city council, I just would like for you guys to have in mind that community members are probably gonna have a little bit of pushback. So that's why I was asking a lot of questions throughout the presentation. And just keep in mind to try to clarify as many of those bullet points as you can, because a lot of them, we hear the complaints about the permitting process takes forever. This department gets criticized a lot. So I just want to remind you guys to keep in mind to be very clear and explain why, a little bit more in detail, why we have to have that 8% increase, especially during this economic crisis that we're going to be facing. So just something to keep in mind.
Thank you for those very salient comments. Councilmember Harmon, did you have any comments or questions? You're up.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I'll just say very briefly, I agree with Councilmember Gutierrez. Obviously, that's not something that you guys don't know. So really appreciate you thinking through a lot of these questions that will inevitably come up. The only point that I wanted to make, sort of overarching, not specific to community development, but to the extent that we can, on some of those fees that Councilmember Friedman mentioned, to the extent that we can figure out ways to defer them if they are specifically fees related to our business businesses, small businesses that may be facing well, not maybe, are certainly facing totally unprecedented challenges. I would be interested, I understand we are in a difficult position and trying to manage our own budget, so I'm sensitive to that as well, but I would be interested in knowing which we can defer or delay or massage, any of those words. That's so I'm with Chair Friedman on that and would be interested in seeing those opportunities when this comes back to council. And other than that, looking forward to the presentations. Thanks.
Mr. Buell, did you have I saw your camera is on. Did you have a comment regarding Councilmember Harmon's comments?
Yes, Chair Freeman, Councilmember Harmon, we will take a look at our fees and be prepared for those types of conversations and questions as we head into our budget hearing on June 2nd.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buell. And Councilmember Gutierrez.
I was just going to add, if we're going to go specific on, for business owners, I would also like you guys to keep in mind for those that have, homes that they are trying to build an extra unit or just fees overall. Because we're all being affected by COVID-19.
Thank you for those. So I'll close the meeting. I have a few comments. I think both of my colleagues, I'm in agreement that this is a very difficult time to be looking at fee increases. So it's very important to understand the benefits, for example, to articulate that when it comes back to council. For example, the 8% part of community development is we need to speed the process up, but we need to have the proper staffing. And so not only what we're getting, but what the impacts would be if we didn't have those. Because I think that the public needs to understand the trade-offs on the level of service on those. And the Acela questions, I think, are going to be of interest to the council, especially in regards to the IT position. I think it's important that, like Mr. Forrest said, that other communities have these. Ventura, I think you said, has 7, and we're looking for 1. But just the nature of this program and the importance of it. And then also that when we're looking at the fees in general, I do want to look at some of the fees that we might be able to either defer or at least have some ability to have a payment plan, especially those that are going to be coming up sooner rather than later as our businesses are moving towards reopening. Don't want to have the impression that they're getting bills right away. So if there is, such as with the outdoor licensing fee or others, or fire inspection, those types of fees, that if there is a way to defer those, at least for a few months, to try to allow the cash flow that our businesses need. And then also some of the residential and other fees that are coming in for our community. If you're, house inspections and you're trying to figure out due to rents or other types of things that have not been able to come in. So any flexibility or plans for flexibility that we can have, both for our business community and our residential and other types of uses would be appreciated. And then and just also understanding the levels of not going forward with these, what the impacts would be. Because I think we want to provide a high level of service. We need to support the staff that do that, and what the cost would be. So Mr. Bodette or Mr. Ford, is there anything further that you need from us? I'm looking at the agenda. It doesn't appear that we need to. Do we need to make a motion, or is the feedback that we've given you enough to forward to council?
So today we are looking for a formal motion, not just regarding the general fund, but what we've heard before. And I have one small adjustment, and I can help guide the recommendations for today. Let me just. So just want to clarify. So as part of the Finance Committee's review of the budget, we typically bring any adjustments we know about to the Finance Committee to have them sign off on them and recommend them to full council. This is a little bit of a different budget cycle in that you'll have a more robust adjustment package coming to full council when you start deliberations probably in mid-June. right now, I just have one adjustment for you, and basically this is an error. It was just an administrative error that we made. We double counted some budget in a line when it was already counted in the salary and benefits line. So we do want to make one adjustment to the energy management fund, and that is to reduce it by this amount, as there was a double count. But we will be bringing a full package of adjustments and everything else to full council in mid-June. But
okay, continue on.
Yeah, so kind of next steps is we take the finance committee recommendations today and we present those when we do full council deliberations in mid-June. And then finance council would deliberate, and then we would bring the adoption in on June 23rd. So today what we're looking for is finance committee to form the recommendations that you want forwarded to council. And what you've heard thus far is the general fund revenue assumptions, enterprise fund fee adjustments, and the general fund fee adjustments that you heard today, as well as the one staff recommended adjustment that I gave you. So that's what I'm looking for today, is a formal recommendation to forward to council.
So in terms of the fee adjustments that we discussed today, even though we would be forwarding them on, the presentation that would come to the full council would include a discussion of some of the items that we were looking at in terms of either deferments or payment plans or those types of things. So that would be a full council discussion that the council is still able to have.
Yeah,
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair Freeman, and that could be your recommendation, as part of your recommendation, rather.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start off for the motion is to approve the staff recommendations along with for the fee adjustments, the discussion on looking at flexibility for any of the fees moving forward.
Second.
And I have a second by Councilmember Harmon. So is there any discussion from my colleagues? Councilmember Gutierrez?
So just to be clear, we are moving forward with staff recommendation, but we are going to have discussions on the extra fees at council.
Correct. These are recommendations from the Finance Committee, and all our discussion today will be part of the presentation that's given to full council, but it will be up to the entire council, including us, on which fees we want to adopt at the end of the day.
Okay, because there are a couple of the recommendations that I'm not in favor of, so I'm fine with the recommendation that you gave.
So just to be clear, Mr. Bodette, if there are any of this full package that we have specific concerns about, we still have that ability, just to clarify for Councilmember Gutierrez, because I want to make sure that she's comfortable with this, that if there is a fee or anything else in here that she wants to discuss further and perhaps not support at that time, there is that option at council. This is just a recommendation from finance to move these forward to council for full consideration.
Chair Freeman, members committee, exactly that. And your recommendations today could be whatever the committee, it's up to the, whatever the committee decides today is what we would forward to council in June.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that, and we can have a discussion on any of these specific at full council. And so with that, is there any further comments from my colleagues? Don't see any lights on, so if I could have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a motion to approve the recommended fee adjustments as articulated by Chair Friedman. The motion by Friedman, the second by Committee Member Harmon. And we'll do a roll call vote. Committee Member Alejandra Gutierrez.
Yes.
Committee Member Harmon.
Yes.
And Chair Friedman.
Yes.
That's unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. So, Mr. Bodette, is there anything else that we have on the agenda? I don't see anything before we adjourn.
Chair, that is it for today.
All right, thank you all staff, and the meeting of the Finance Committee is adjourned. Thank you.